Michael Guy at Tasmania. If they'd like to come up and receive their prize. Next category, adult literary. What we like to say. Another tie, this time, Tim Richards and Karen Hurst. So both of them would like to come up with their prize. Next category, adult photograph. Winner, Russell Devlin. Would Russell like to come forward, please? I think Russell's been enchanted with Katy at the moment. We'll move on to the next one. Unfortunately, she's not here. Junior poetry winner is Joanna Ding from the ACT, and I'll ask Karen to accept that for Joanna. Russell doesn't seem to be here again, so we'll leave him out at the moment. Right, on to today's events. 11:50 we'll have the first panel, and we're looking for people to come up and represent a doctor of their choice. At the moment, we have Dallas Jones representing William Hartnell, Karen Hurst representing Colin Baker, and if we're lucky, we may have Katy representing John Pertwee. I'm not sure on that one. So if anyone there out there would like to... Tim Richards will represent Patrick Troutman, so if anyone would like to represent Tom Baker or Peter Davison, then please come up after this opening. Katy will be signing autographs at only specific times throughout the day, so please don't go up to her when she's doing something else and ask for an autograph. We don't want to interrupt the rest of the activities for the day. There will be a question and answer session with Katy, and the person who puts up their hand will be asked to come forward to the microphone and ask Katy their question. That will run for 30 minutes only, please, because we want to get on to the other things before Katy has to leave. The hucksters will be closed during the panels and Katy's speech and things like that. This is to allow the people who are operating the huckster stalls to get out here and enjoy themselves as well. They will reopen during photograph sessions, autograph sessions and things like that. And so if you want to get your autographs and photographs, just make sure you get along there and don't miss out on it, because we can't have them sort of running over too much time. The second panel is on target novels. We want 3 people to argue for target novels and 3 to argue against. So far we don't have any people wanting to go on this one. It's understandable. So if you'd like to come up, thank you. If you'd like to come up, we'd appreciate that very much. Dallas Jones is our fan guest of honour for today, and we'd like to welcome Dallas. Dallas seems enchanted with Katy too. We will be presenting the biggest thing today, probably, to come out of it, will be the presentation of the double gammas. The double gammas, for those of you who don't know it, are sort of the Logies of Doctor Who fandom in Australia. I think there's 6 divisions ranging from fanzine editor to best fanzine. And we have those all in a sealed envelope, and they'll be opened in front of you for the first time. Katy will be leaving at 4:30 to catch a plane home. So if you haven't seen her by then, you're not going very well. Hopefully, now we can get Dallas Jones up here. While Dallas is coming, I'll fill you in on the videos. Videos are going all day. We've had a bit of a problem. There's not 2 video rooms as previously advertised. There's only 1. And so the videos will sort of be combined. The more popular things will be running throughout the day. And probably the thing which impressed the most is the American documentary. It's a very good mock-up done by American fans of the Doctor Who series in general. It's extremely fun. Also, we have featured a lot of Katy's adventures, or Joe Grant's adventures, in today's program, including the Green Death, the final episode, and Terror of the Autons, the first episode. A big announcement today is that Katy Manning will be appearing in a Christmas movie here very soon called Frog Ring or something like that. And don't miss her, she's the only female in the cast. So you're going to go along with your younger brothers and that. Don't miss her. Yes, still walking on stage.
Yeah. And a program appeared on the ABC. I was interested in history at the time, and it was called Doctor Who. The write-ups talked about going to see things like the Crusaders and things like that. That got me interested. But that first episode is something which stands apart, I feel, from the rest of Doctor Who. It's something which is needed in any show, something to grab you. The main reason it grabbed you in that first episode was William Hartnell. He came across as a strong character that you could, especially for me, someone like a 10-year-old, identify this grandfatherly figure. So the main thing was, to me with William Hartnell is that as a child, he always looked up to me as a grandfather. Yet at the same time, he was that sort of person a grandfather is, which a grandfather, although can love you, also thinks about you and decides that if you're a kid, if something's naughty, something like that can be very hard on you. So the heartless figure, as well as being a grandfatherly figure, was a figure of authority. He had his moods, like you all sort of people, you were a kid and sort of you knew older people, so they always seemed to be very funny, sort of different moods and everything like that. So to me, that stage, that's what William Hart was about. Up till a couple of years ago, that was all I remember of William Hart, other than certain stories. But with the ability of the technological age, I've been able to see some of the stories I've been involved in and be able to look further into the character. And the interesting thing about the character, which I've noticed, which as a trait which all the Doctors have, but which William Hartnell was most interesting about, was his curiosity. But it wasn't just a curiosity to find out what was happening, it was a very limited curiosity. Once he was interested in enigmas, but once he solved the enigma, that was it, he didn't care. The particular story was Keys to Marinus. So the first episode of the story, he found out what he wanted to find out, and he just wanted to leave. So Doctor Who nowadays is nothing like that sort of thing. So you get the Doctor trying to just leave. There are other stories, for example, similar sort of things happening. Once he found out the thing he was interested in, that was it. He was ready to go off again. So the first facet of William Hartnell, the Doctor, and the main facet is his curiosity. And this curiosity has always been continued right throughout every other Doctor. The other facet, as I said, we mentioned was his age, which also led to the idea of the crotchety old man, which is sort of a bit of a generalisation. But the important thing was it wasn't just him, it was a group of people, so it became a family. So the other thing about the whole of the Hartnell time is his relationship not just with the single companion, but with a group of companions, and the changing of those groups. So the compassion, especially, of the stories we've seen between him and his granddaughter is one of the most interesting, I think, relationships in the whole of Doctor Who. Particularly, it becomes apparent in things when he leaves, and if you ever get to see a story called Rescue, the relationship and how it affects him there. So there are those sort of characters of the first Doctor: his curiosity, his age, his relationship with his companions, and especially his granddaughter, are the things that, to me, even now, 20 years later, still to me, make him probably the best Doctor that there have been. The original, as I said, and to me, the best.
You can hear me all right? Yeah, right. Actually, my reasons for thinking, representing Patrick Troughton as the best Doctor are probably similar to Dallas's, in that, sort of fond, strong memories from childhood. I don't go quite back as far as Dallas. I think I was about 6 months old when it started, when William Hartnell first popped up, so I wouldn't remember. Yeah. So, you were about 6 months old too, weren't you? Yeah. Anyway, so I don't really have any clear memories of William Hartnell, though I'm very glad to have seen his stories since, in various ways. Yeah. Anyway, Patrick Troughton left very strong memories of him, and I think something interesting. I think the first Doctor was very much an anti-hero, and he wasn't your usual style of hero. He didn't go gallivanting in and doing all the things for good and right. He was an interesting character in his own right, who, like Del said, you might just decide to leave it. I felt the second Doctor similar in a way that he wasn't your usual type of hero. He didn't go bravely dashing in and saving maidens in distress and so on. He was a very vulnerable person, and I think we could all identify with that. He was, monsters turn up and he'd be just as frightened as we were. He'd sort of run away from them. I think the invasion, if you get to watch that, a number of times he runs away from the Cybermen. It's getting fired at. The wonderful thing was that even though he wasn't perhaps this brave sort of physical type doctor, he could still win against the odds. He could still use his brain power and win that way. And in a way, I think we felt a bit more secure because he could do that, but we sort of identified with him in that way. I think he also, perhaps at the Troughton era, generally, I think the companions worked very well with him. For example, Jamie and Zoe as a combination with that doctor, so that was very memorable for those stories. Patrick Troughton was sort of, Jamie, Zoe, when I say run, this sort of thing. So that was quite wonderful. And so that era is very fondly remembered by me, and the sort of the monster seasons and so on. So it was an interesting continuation of William Hartnell while being something quite different. And in that way, of course, he was the first Doctor to sort of be regenerated. So, he was the first new generation. So I think we owe a lot of thanks for helping to maintain Doctor Who after William Hartnell had to leave the role. So anyway, I think that's about all I have to say. So I'll pass over to Katy for John Who.
Excuse me, have you ever tried putting a cigarette out in a jam jar? It's not easy. John Pertwee. I think John Pertwee brought something very special to Doctor Who, and I agree certainly with what Dallas had to say and Tim had to say, because not just because I was in the earlier parts of Doctor Who. It was a long time ago that I was in Doctor Who, but I grew up on Doctor Who. I mean, there was Children's Hour in England, and I mean, not that it was a children's program, because when they did their surveys, they found out that it was 75% adult, but it was sort of presented at a children's time. I think a lot of the adults got interested because in England it was on a Saturday and it followed the footy, and so you automatically had sort of family viewers, and they became addicted to Doctor Who. And as I say, it wasn't such a big following then, and it built up very, very quickly, and round about the time I came into it was just as it was reaching its sort of peak, if you like. I mean, it hadn't hit America like it has now. That's unbelievable. Anyway, that's another story. But John Pertwee had an extraordinary yes, magic. That's actually how we started with John Pertwee. I remember I put out one of his experiments actually with an extinguisher. But he had, not only as an actor, but he brought it to Doctor Who, that incredible magic. I always believed that John Pertwee, I felt that he could be 2,000 years old. Do you know what I mean? In his face, in his eyes, was that he had lived that long, he'd experienced that much. And I think that came across hugely. He was a doctor, I think one of the first doctors that really started to show a love and a care and a respect for the world, the universe, there, here, and everywhere. He was very moral. And the wonderful relationship which I think John built up with the Master was that he never wanted to kill him. He never wanted to wipe him out. It was like two great minds, and it was always that they actually respected each other, although one was representing evil. It's the old story for children, you get the baddie from Cowboys, remember years ago, like the sister kid, you get the baddies all dressed in black, hello, and you get the goodies, and there's one there all dressed in white. And that's very much the way that one recognised one's heroes in the older sort of television programmes and movies, etc. And I think that came across very strongly, that relationship and great respect for each other's minds that John and Roger brought across. I mean, not only did they have great respect for each other as actors, they brought that into the series very well. I think when I came in, it was probably the first Doctor Who girl, and this was a lot that John and I worked out, that actually didn't have any special abilities. She had no great powers. In fact, I mean, she wasn't stupid. She certainly wasn't stupid. She was a very brave lady. I just had something who studied an awful lot of things but didn't actually get anywhere in any of them, according to my first episode. But that relationship, because of Jo's basic inability, she was so innocent and sort of went into everything hell for leather, that automatically out of that came a form of protection from the Doctor. And even to a certain extent, the Master. Strangely, in some episodes, you saw that he actually rather quite liked Jo, in a strange and twisted sort of way. And so you began in that, and with the Brig, and with John Levine, and with Richard Franklin, thank you. Every now and again, you know how you go blank on names just as you're going to use them? There became a sort of, there grew there, the roots, I think, of a family. And I think it was one of the only actual families that came. I mean, all the Doctors had their interesting and different relationships, but ours, during our time with John, was a sort of family situation. Everybody caring desperately about everybody else. And I think that that made it a very positive time for Doctor Who, a very pleasurable time, a very caring time. And I think John gave so much to that show as a Doctor, so much to that show as an actor. And I think that that is probably why that particular time was one of the most successful times in Doctor Who, because of all that, the amount of work and the amount of love that went into it. And that came right across in this wonderful Doctor with this beautiful ethereal quality. And I think he will always, in my mind, not just because I worked at him, but when I have seen repeats of Doctor Who, he just has enormous charm. He's just wonderful to watch, I think. So I'm now going to pass on to the next Doctor.
Well, it's hard to follow an act like that, but I'll try anyway. Oh, it makes it all worthwhile. No, well, why I like Tom Baker so much as a Doctor is because I think for most of the time he was an absolute nut. He was, yeah, you know, he was schizophrenic, because at times he could be almost like, you know, a little kid, little harpo marks offering people jelly babies and, you know, threatening, I don't know, savages, you kill, you know, come one step near me and I'll take you with this deadly jelly baby. And other times he'd, you know, some poor fellow, he'd be attacked by a crinoid, he'd be dying in fearful agony. He says things like, amputate the arm, it's a source of the infection. So, I think he had sort of a part of the anti-hero about him, part of the hero about him, and it was interesting because it was essentially unpredictable, and I think that's probably why it lasted for so long, because, you know, people just became so interested in the character. Like, of course, the other Doctors have been very popular, but I think he was the one who was, it sort of became the ultimate cult Doctor. Like, you know, of course we had the others since, but I mean, like, just take the example of America. Like, he's still the most popular one there. Like, they were introduced to him, and sort of he just sort of built up on that, and sort of like often sort of you hear him being knocked in England and elsewhere by, you know, sort of people, but you know, sort of, you want to compare him against the others. But I think he, you know, just has that impact. Like, drying up here, but never mind. I have dried up here.
Dimensionally, may I just say this? Dimensionally, I think there was more dimensions to the character that he played as an actor to the Doctor than any of the others. I think that's really what you're trying to say, that instead of having 2 or 3 dimensions, he had 4 or 5, which made him compelling.
Yeah.
He has that quality as an actor in anything he does.
Yeah, and I think when he sort of, you know, finally had really started packing it in, you know, sort of basically everyone got fed up with him. I think because, in a sense, he'd been playing it for so long, sort of the approach they wanted, it was starting to, you know, sort of really sort of run out in that respect. Like in his last season, he was, they said, okay, well, don't be terribly silly like you were in the previous one. And of course, with Graham Williams, he'd be told sort of, don't make him incredibly violent like he'd been with Philip Hinchcliffe. And so if he couldn't sort of be this person who was on one hand, you know, almost a maniac killer, on the other hand, well, it's going a bit far perhaps, but Okay, so I'll give you, for instance, an invisible enemy. Sort of, there's this guy, it's taken over by, whatever, that nucleus thing, and I mean, he goes and chucks them in this vat of horrible, revolting stuff for no reason at all. I mean, that's nasty. I mean, he makes Avon look like a wimp sometimes. Anyway, so basically what happened, I think really towards the end, he just started becoming bland and sort of really, I suppose he got out, sort of just in time in a way. I've got all these other interesting points to make. I can't think of them at the moment, so I'll hand it on to Jane.
Well, Peter Davison, what can you say about him? Might be good looking, yes. He's to be admired because he stepped into a very hard shoes. When Tom Baker left, the generation of children over there that were watching was almost the same as in William Hartnell days. They were used to the one doctor. As far as they were concerned, Tom Baker was the doctor. And when he left the series, it must have been extremely hard for Peter Davison to come in and sort of have to live up to the expectations and to sort of create a new image for himself, which is why I think the cricketing idea was a very good one. It may not have worked successfully in all cases, but it was different, and that's probably one of the reasons why most of the mothers liked him. He had that sparkling appeal. He was a boyish type of doctor, very much younger than the rest, and he was very lucky, I think. He worked very well with his companions, although in some cases they didn't work very well with him. I don't think I have heard that he was a very gentleman type of actor, a lovely person to work with, and he never begrudged anyone or held anything against any actors. I think mainly Tegan Jovanka was one of the highlights of Peter Davison. Tegan and Peter worked together very well. There was the type of working relationship that Katy had with John, whereas the other two, Sarah Sutton, who played Nissa, and Matthew Waterhouse, who played Adric, were very much on the outer during that era. It was mainly the doctor and Tegan who did most of the action. Peter Davison, in Black Orchid, his cricketing abilities were shown out. Very faked, I will admit. Yes. But he did a good job in that story, particularly being a two-parter. There was a lot of scenes in that which he had to perform in, and I think that he really did sort of wander around. He wandered around corridors, I will admit, but in that story, apparently his script was very difficult to remember. He had very hard lines.
You should have done what we used to do, write them on the floor.
And that story itself was very good in the way that it told a story of the disfigured man. It wasn't an alien, it wasn't a monster, and in a way it was a bit disappointing that they were calling George Cranley a villain, because he was no villain, that's for sure. It's really about all I can say, apart from the one bad point of the Peter Davison era, which I think created a bit of agony during the era, and that was Adric. Adric sort of took away a lot from Peter Davison's era, and I guarantee if you took Adric out of that era, everyone would look on that time as being really good. But Matthew did a few things for the series, but I think he wasn't the right part. He wasn't cast properly. Perhaps someone else might have done a better job. But overall, Peter Davison did a good job to step in for Tom Baker. So I'll hand you on to Karen.
Colin Baker. First of all, a disclaimer. I have been watching Doctor Who since he don't like Dallas, and I really believe that all of them were fantastic in their roles. I have enjoyed every performance of the actors playing parts of Doctor Who. There has not been one episode that I have disliked. No Rotten Tomatoes, please. About Colin Baker, I can't really say a great deal because I have only seen the first story, like most of us.
Oh, yes, we've all seen
The first story. I really enjoyed his performance in Twin dilemma. He had, I don't know whether many people noticed, but to me, he put in a lot of elements of all of the Doctors. Like there was a part where he was hanging onto his labels and marching around, and it was almost exactly the same as William Hartnell used to do. When he was getting annoyed, he'd march around the console room with his hands on his labels, glaring at everybody, and there was a piece in it like that. And there were other elements of all the Doctors. So I think that was a very clever technique to throw in. I don't know if that's a good word for it.
Yes, I mean, brilliantly what he did was that he did obviously do a lot of homework, and he managed to get that it's almost like the overloaded Doctor, that he'd been through so many changes, and in that he brought them all out, which I think as an actor was a brilliant step forward.
Yeah. Now, despite the costume, which some of us may need sunglasses to watch Doctor Who from now on, but that's your own prerogative, I think that for that first episode where he was acting, he had to act
voices in corners of rooms, that this was now John's time, which Pat respected, and so it came across. But when they did start working well together, it was absolute bloody magic. It really was, because they both have a twinkle in their eye in the way that they play the Doctor. And that made it, I think, it was fun too, that episode. It wasn't as heavy as everybody thought it was going to be. It was lovely. It was fascinating to work on. Come on, somebody. No questions at all? Well, we've obviously said so much that we've covered every possible contingency here. We've got a question up here.
Sort of Roger Delgado's master obviously had a black sense of humour as part of that character. Was he like that, and was he terrible like that in real life?
No. No, he's more opposite a person to what he played. It's good thing you tell I went to drama school, can't you? He was probably as completely opposite to the character that he played, which is often actually for an actor is great, because you get a much better performance out of yourself if you're playing against time. And Roger has played baddies all his life. He's always played against time, which gives a much better result in a performance than if you're actually playing close to yourself. Because the reason people act is because they don't really want to be them, either because they're too insecure or too shy. Usually shy people become actors. And the further you get away from what your character is, the better you like it. So that's always useful to remember.
How much of yourself do you feel that you put into Joe? Did you try to put a lot in, or did they sort of say no?
No, I'll tell you truthfully. I think people thought that when they met me, they thought, oh, she's playing herself. That's not true. I mean, I haven't really got the time right now, I don't think, to tell you the intricacies of being an actor. But when you're playing a part, you become that part. So I became Joe. So everything I did sort of was all part of Joe. It wasn't me, it was her at home. It's very hard. I don't shake parts off that easily. So then I started to say, oh yes, Joe is me and I am Joe, and we are all together, look at you. Yes, I think I'll write a script about it. And so I really thought that I was sort of Joe was an extension of me, and I used to say so. Of course, it's not true now. It's so long ago, I can tell you it's not true now. There's nothing like Joe at all. If Joe had been played how I actually was in those days, it would have been a very different show. It's an interesting, I mean, I find this whole subject fascinating. I mean, at the moment, I'm sort of trying to break down those things in a project that I'm working on at the moment. But what happened was when they met me, and as Terry Dix tells the story, I mean, I'm nervous. I'm very, very nervous, so I'm prone to chain smoke, trip over, get lost, chew gum, stick polos in my ears. You know, I terribly, because I'm very energetic, and I get terribly excited, you see, about everything. And they saw that because, I mean, I walked into this audition and it was the second audition I'd been to in my life. And I was playing a very straight role at the time. And so I was actually so nervous, and I was trying very hard to push the character that I was playing away. And I walked in, and you've never seen such a gibbering wreck in your life. And they thought this was hysterically funny. And, and I couldn't see, they gave me the script, and I'm going, and they said, will you do a read-through? I said, yes, if I can see it. And they thought this was hysterical, and they wanted me to put that into Joe. So I did. And so there was a part of me went into Joe, but then who came what and what came who? I mean, it's very, very complex, because actors do take on what they're doing. You can't help it. And for 3 years, how else can you cannot separate the character that you're playing from you, which is why we're all so screwed up. It's very hard. You don't go home and just sit down for 10 minutes and have a cup of tea and you're fine. You've got a whole other personality to shed, and you can't do it overnight. So the next day you've gone back to work again, and you've still got that personality. It takes a long time to get out of a character. But I couldn't see that then. I was too young and too inexperienced to actually analyse what was happening to me. So I just went along with everything. And I do have a problem with my eyes and things like that. So they were used as Joe's characterisation, Joe's little idiosyncrasies. And the energy that Joe had, I think that does come from me. But then any character I play, whether it's a quiet character, there's still going to be an underlying energy in it. Obviously. So that is just the beginning of an answer for you. Good question. What was it?
The start of Curse of Peloton in particular, you were all dressed up, I think it was Curse of Peloton, you were going out with Mike Yates. Was there ever any plans to make that a romance?
Yes. Yes, there was. Mike Yates was brought into it as, I suppose, either my Adric or very hard age group to cast. Adric's age group, I have to just say. I won't go into why, but it is. It's a very hard one to cast to get the performance that you're looking for. Jamie, all that sort of... They were looking for that again, but it didn't happen. And as soon as the scriptwriters saw that it wouldn't happen, they stopped writing it, because they saw that the balance and the chemistry belonged to John and I, which they didn't know that it was going to. And it did start to intrude upon that, except it worked terribly well for us at the end of the Green Death, that in actual fact he was there all the time, and yet there was never actually the relationship between us that he himself also wanted there to be. But as I say, the chemistry, you can't really tell until you see two actors work together. But John and I, our chemistry went boom. And so it would have been constantly an intrusion to have Mike coming in and saving me. Wouldn't have worked. They tried other love affairs for me through it. I did actually, I have to just tell you about David Trout. Did anybody see on television, he was in The Normal Conquests? No? Brilliant actor, I have to tell you, he's a brilliant actor. But he came along and they started this sort of romance. I actually truly fell totally and utterly in love with him, but I was too shy to tell him, and vice versa. So there was this wonderful little relationship going on between David Trout and I, but never went to anything because we were both too shy. And then we tried another relationship with an actor called Alan Tucker, who's left the business. Not because we didn't, but he left it. And it just never quite worked, because John and I seemed to have this thing that was for us, and for presumably people watching it, the successful relationship. There was definitely something between us that worked very well. Maybe because we both like comedy, who knows, but something worked between us.
Well, thank you, Katy. Bit of talking there, so I'm sure your jaws feel a bit sore. They're not good. Well, now we've got our first autograph signing session. We're going to make this as close as possible with running to time. Katy, we'll leave Katy up here, I think. So if you just file up the stairs in single file, please, with whatever you want autographed. And please, only about 30 minutes, please.
Okay. Who's going to start?
Right, we might start the ball rolling then. I was thinking back to one particular photo that I've seen, I think from
terror of the autumn, actually. You seem to be very surprised. You've got, what, 10 rings or...
Actually, the total collection was 16.
At one time?
At one time. When I took them off, can you imagine how I felt? I mean, my hands suddenly went like this. I mean, I got so used to these rings. And do you want to hear the ring story? Well, I love rings. I adore rings to this day. And I had a collection of about 10 when I joined Doctor Who. I think that's probably a bit of Katy Manning that went in, was the rings. And I was a nail biter, a terrible nail biter. And John Pertwee used to get terribly upset about biting my nails because we tried false nails. And unfortunately, they all came unstuck onto his jacket one day when I was untying him. And suddenly the camera went close to see, you know, I was practicing my escapology, which I couldn't really do, but I always said I could. And I was doing all this, and the camera went for a close-up to see me untying these fiendish knots, right? And all my nails were stuck to his jacket. So we elbowed that, and John couldn't take this person sitting in the corner biting their nails any longer. So he suggested that I should increase my collection of rings. And he went out, and I think he went to Greece or somewhere like that, and he bought me this really lovely sort of, like, Greek copy of one of the old sort of treasures that they dig up in Greece, and it was a beautiful, like, lion's head, and that sort of went right up my thumb. And I got more and more rings, and I actually eventually, my hands were too heavy to bite my nails. So it actually works. So if anybody's a nail biter, wear a lot of rings, and you'll find that getting your hand to your mouth is really hard. And I actually stopped biting my nails. John worked on it for 2 years and finally won. I became a non-nail biter, but the rings became very much a sort of trademark, for want of another word, really. Very important, my rings. And eventually, I'll tell you what happened to all those rings and why I'm not wearing them now. Is as we grow older and we change every so often, you become, you just sort of change a little bit, you grow a little bit, you go into different directions. And suddenly one day I decided that that was the end of that part of my life. It was coming towards the end of Doctor Who, I think, really. And so I gave each ring to various charities to auction off. So all my rings sort of went to a lovely end, actually. And it was all had stories and things. Great.
Did you start biting your nails again?
Did I? Well, at moments of great strain, I find myself wandering towards that. Because once you've been a nail biter, it's very hard to lose that habit. But no, as you can see, I'm much better now, thank you.
John Levine once said, when you joined Doctor Who, John Pertwee was like moving that idol. That's a lot of that jacket, whereas John Levine joined fresh.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'd actually just worked with a man who was extraordinarily famous and in a serious acting in terms of drama. He did all this with John Bray, who originated in the sense of television. We go through periods. And the kitchen sink drama came right out of everybody's room of being glossy and gorgeous. This was straight into women with curlers in their hair. And that became very popular in England, that kind of drama. And I'd just done a series with this particular actor, who was probably the most temperamental man I'd ever worked with. And I thought all actors were going to be like that. And he used to throw kettles at directors. And I won't use the word that he said to the wardrobe lady, but he suggested in answer in terms that she should travel. And I mean, I just sat there and thought, well, this is it, isn't it? You know, and I was terribly innocent. I thought to him and say something. This actor was really ferocious, right? And I thought, shall I football? And we got on very well because of that, and it obviously appealed to him. And so when I went to work with John to me was somebody more famous than this man, in the sense that I had known who John was. He wasn't a new star. I'd grown up with the radio, and John had, of course, done the Navy Lark and all those things. And of course, I mean, I'd known who John Pertwee was since I was a little kid. And he's enormously tall when you're very small. And, you know, and he's very upright. You know, he's got extraordinary dignity. And I sort of, I couldn't speak to him. I couldn't say good morning because it sort of got stuck round about there. And I, funnily enough, got to the John, who probably had just that, you know, a little bit more experience, he told me, and he went and told John Pertwee that I was petrified of him. And so through that became, you know, John came up and started to talk to me, and John Levine, so that John and I actually suddenly got bought into John and his life and got to know him just a bit better as he realised our fears that we both had. I think I was much worse than John Levine. Now, John Levine has always had a certain front. I, at that time, didn't know what front was. No idea. And so it was lovely. So John and I became friends, John Levine and I, and that he then sort of helped me become less frightened of John Pertwee and less. It's that thing now. There are all sorts of people in this world that you really admire and you want to meet, and you get to meet them and you go, ooh, and you know you think all those wonderful things you're going to say to that person, and nothing comes out. And even to this day, I have that problem. You know, like when I first met Tony Randall, who I happen to admire enormously as an actor. I mean, I said all those dumb things that you wish you hadn't said. You get very hot and embarrassed. And then, of course, once that's gone, then you start to work with it becomes very different. But I mean, it's the same for me as it is anybody else. I find meeting people that I admire terribly frightening for the first, you know, few minutes or so. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what we expect from each other or anything, but it does work that way, right? Enormously.
Did you ever get to meet royalty?
Actually, yes, I have, dear. Only, I mean, I've actually danced with Lord Snowden in the old days when he had a beaten haircut and wore a beaten jacket. And I'm very short-sighted, and I went to this party. And the room suddenly split in two in terms of people. And everybody, except me, I didn't notice that the room was split in two, and I was sort of floating around, and this chap came up and said, would you like to? I said, oh, it's very nice of you. And then he bobbed around the floor, and I was like, shut your own. All this way, what's your name? I said, Tony, I said, Tony, I'm Katy. And then suddenly I was sitting down, and he said, oh, you know, I think he introduced to Princess Margaret. And it was hysterical, because I mean, I just don't, when you're very short-sighted, you go through life just not knowing a lot of things. So that was interesting. And then my father was a writer, and he was also chairman of the press club in the UK for a while. And obviously the Queen Mother came to open the New Zealand Press Club, and then on another occasion, I think the Queen was at some other do, because my father was also in politics, so I got to meet a lot of those sorts of people. I think if I was to be introduced to them today, I would be really much more embarrassed than I was then. I was just that much younger that it was all okay. I remember having to learn. I went to a special kind of school for a few years where they rather felt that if you were a failure academically, then the best thing you could learn to do is to cook for 35 people at a dinner party, and know exactly how to seat them and what to feed them, and how to curtsy to the Queen and things like that. So I was well prepared for that sort of life. However, I deviated and acted instead. But actors would think they're worldly. Series that I did, which is terribly awesome, terribly Katy, was, for me, when that was over, I had never experienced, I hadn't done theatre, so I hadn't experienced a long-running show, which I subsequently have experienced. And the other thing that I was doing, we were only just into the second episode, and the characters were, and the actors were a different breed of actor, and so it was a different feeling. So when I went into Doctor Who, when the first series, the first thing came to an end, I actually got so frightened because I suddenly realised I got so close to the director and John, which was okay because he was going to stay, but so close to the director and the other actors in it, that I really didn't want to do any more episodes because I didn't want to work with anybody else. So that's the sort of thing. I mean, I stood there and I looked at John and I said, I don't want to go on anymore, I don't want to do anymore. If I'm going to have all of these new people and they're not going to talk to me, you know, all those insecurities that sort of pour out. And so, yes, I did. I really didn't feel I could go onward because I was losing something that had made me so secure, getting to know them and going through all the thing of pulling all my ligaments in my foot on the first day's filming and all the things that happened. And I got so used to all the technicians. do any of the stunts that I wasn't allowed to do. And I underline that because I wanted to do them all. And there were certain stunts, and that was one they wouldn't let John and I do. They would not let us do it. We begged, we pleaded. John and I really rather liked doing the action bits. We were very into that. And so Stuart Fell became my stunt person because he was the only small person they could find. And the stunt women are usually quite big. And they saw a lot of stunt women, they all said, well, you know, I mean, there's no way they could double for Katy. And Stuart was exactly my size and build. The only problem was that he decided, this was his first time of actually doubling for me, and he decided that he would make me look as terrific as possible going up the side of this great big thing in the middle of the city. And he put on the biggest wiggle you have ever seen in your life. It was a real John Inman going up there, right? Of course, it looked so funny from the back to see Joe Grant's bottoming. In the middle of this very dramatic situation, there's Joe going, oh, I want my head off. It was terrible. And of course, when we saw it, I don't know where we were watching Rushes and that, I mean, John and I were just on the floor. So we took Stuart's fellas up and we said, no, listen, you've got to take the wiggle down. But it was lovely because it was his way, very conscientious. He was trying to study how to make Joe work from the back, if you see what I mean, which is lovely. That the guy was working. And all the stunt boys we had on the show were like that. They were all part of the family. I mean, very much so. We knew them all, and we cared about them very much. And we all used to work out stunts together, and they knew how much John and I liked to do it, so they supported us in doing it. They didn't say, oh no, we're the stunt boys. We're doing it. They always said, okay, you guys want to do it? We'll show you how to do it. Which is terrific. It's nice to have that.
You worked with the three doctors. Now, Joe Grant worked excellently with John Pertwee.
Yes.
How do you feel the same character would have went with, say, First Doctor, William Hart, or Dick Trout, or even any of the later?
Just as well. I really believe, I mean, yes, I think there was a chemistry between John and I, which obviously went into the characters, but I believe that whatever the doctor one had worked with, one would have worked with them, and that character would have bent to work with them. And I got on very well with Pat, as it happened, so I know I could have worked with Pat. And I probably could have worked very well with William Hart. I mean, it's hard to answer that, because I don't know. I can say with Pat, knowing Pat, that yes, I could work very well with Pat. I mean, I would have liked to have worked, I guess I'm sure I could have made the character work, whichever way would have worked best with any of the doctors, really. It's just a question of, you know, feeling the whole thing and then slowly building around the little things that make your relationship, really.
Was there ever any ideas to actually bring you back, even as special?
I was asked to go back for, well, a lot of discussions going on across the water with the five doctors, because I'm told, I never know, because I seem to be so far away from it all now. Terry told me that they wanted me in the Five Doctors, and that Sarah's script with John was in fact my script. And if you actually watch it, which I did, you can see she's actually doing a Joe, because the lines weren't Sarah's lines, they were Joe's lines, and that made it a bit strange, because she wouldn't have reacted like that. I would. Up there, no way. Unless the doctor was up there and engaging, and I was up there in half a second. But no, I was actually asked a little while ago, once again by Terry when we were in the States together, how I would feel about if they go to, was it 7 doctors, 8 doctors, 9 doctors, where are we up to? 6. Oh, no. Whether I would be interested, because obviously they have to sound up. It's quite expensive to take me home again. You know, it would be, obviously. Whether I'd like to be in it. And you can imagine how many people have asked me that question. Would you like to go back into doctor? And I have to honestly say no. I mean, me says, yes, I would love to be back because of all the memories. I'm talking about it now, and this bloody warm feeling in my tummy. But as an actress, I have gone miles and miles and miles away from it. But one thing I did say to him, if Joe did appear in it again, I'm just out of interest, I just like to play with the idea. Joe went back into it. I would want to develop Joe to where she would be now. Which probably wouldn't go down well at all if I do. But, you know, I would want to do that much work. There is no way I could walk back onto that set as a 20-odd-year-old Joe Bond. Absolutely no way. Not just physically, because obviously newsy is on television, but mentally I couldn't do that anymore. I mean, I just couldn't do all that anymore. It's just too enthusiastic for words. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't come from my soul anymore. And acting it is one thing, but it would need just that much more from me, and I wouldn't have that truth to give. So if they made that, and I would probably think about it, but in my heart of hearts, I don't think I want to go back. Just the memories are lovely.
I need to check last time about this, which I wondered if you had a follow-up. You actually do appear in quotes in the next season.
Sorry?
I mentioned before, last time I met you, that you actually do appear in quotes in the next season. The story is called Time Lash, and a picture of Joe is shown to a person and they recognise you as Joe.
That's a relief. It would be much funnier if they said, no, never seen before in my life.
The doctor has to recognise you as Joe, otherwise he gets shot.
I didn't get paid for it.
Yeah, I'm just talking. So they used a picture of you, so you are in the next season as Joe. If you
Isn't that sweet? Oh, well, that's all right. Joe as Joe was, not as Joe would be. Isn't it, Marvin? I mean, if you think about it, it's an interesting exercise, because having said this to Terry, I sat down and I thought to myself, how would Joe have developed? I mean, she went up the Amazon to look for alternative food. From there on, what on earth happened to Joe? It's a fascinating thought, because I don't think Joe would have stopped there. I mean, you know, she's definitely one of those that would have gone on doing unbelievably creative. Now, she's very creative, Joe.
There are plans afoot in England for people or actors and actresses to write books that are sequels for the companions who've left the show. Would you ever consider doing that?
No.
Would you give your permission?
Yes. And then choose the best one.
So that would be your idea of what you think Joe would do or could do now.
Yes, I would want to see the most, I mean, if somebody was going to do it, I would want it to be original and inventive. You know, that would be the only thing I would say. I would work with it if somebody wanted to do it, and I was asked if I would do some work with them. I certainly would, because I found a new little niche for myself in life at the moment, which I'm quite excited about, and part of that is involved in writing. So it's something I now know, and I'm just beginning to learn that I can actually do. And therefore I'd like to be involved in discussions about it, and I wouldn't actually like to take on the project, because I don't, it's a thought that I enjoy thinking about, but I wouldn't like to commit time to it. Juncture. I think twice in my life, and I must be honest, I was very unhappy the second time round. So, you know, it might happen again. I don't honestly know. But it's a thought that fascinates me, and I do spend quite a bit of time thinking about it. But if I wrote it, it would be comedy, I have to tell you. I mean, if I had anything to do with what happened to Joe, it would be hysterical. Because I'm afraid that's where I've gone to these days. You know, I'm very full on into comedy at the moment, which is something John Pertwee always said I would do. Always said to me, he said, you're peculiar. He said, you know, you are just so peculiar that you have to do comedy. I said, nonsense, I'm going to be a dramatic actress. I'm going to be a film actress. Of course, I landed up by getting a very solid learning in the theatre and went very heavily into comedy. And now I found out that comedy is absolutely the only thing I really, really, really love. So it would have to be funny.
Well, while you're on your new niche, would you like to explain exactly what it is?
Well, I sort of reached a point in my career where I really had to decide, having come to a new country, which I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, going somewhere new and strange and starting again. And especially when you've And I was very, very fortunate. Once in a lifetime in this business, something very important happens to you, and sometimes you don't recognise it and you miss it. And I was very lucky, I didn't miss it. I met somebody in a play that I was doing who played my sister. We played the Pigeon Sisters in The Odd Couple. And there was something between the two of us as actresses which I've just never experienced in my life before. And it was you know, I'm talking very similar sort of things John and I had, but this was just even more peculiar. I mean, our reactions were like one person. It's really weird. She's very tall and dark, and I'm very short and fair. And we found that we had an enormous ability to make people laugh together. It was even greater than mine individually, and she hadn't been in the business for many, many years. She'd been out of the business. And we decided to not let this chance go, and we sat back, and we were sitting in a bus shelter in Melbourne. And we were there for about an hour and a half, because nobody bothered to tell us, did they, that there was a strike on. I mean, it's lovely. I think people walk past you, see you sitting in the shelter, and they don't have the decency to say, excuse me, but there's no trams. Not buses, trams. And but during that hour and a half, we put together the idea for a television series, something which I had never embarked upon in my life before. I had no idea how to go about actually getting it put together. So, but we did. We just opened our mouths and knocked on doors. And I think people were so taken aback by our positivity and our determination that they didn't close the door in our face. And so we found a co-producer, we formed a company. We just finished the final draft of the first episode. It was originally called Good Sports, then it was called Two in the Bush, and we've gone back to our original title. And Stuart Bevan, does that name ring a bell? Is anybody Stuart Bevan? Cliff. Professor Jones, as I live and breathe, came out and helped us with the project. So that was lovely for me. I mean, imagine, not only had we once been engaged, but whilst we were making the last episode of Doctor Who, we never got married, but we did get engaged. And sort of 10 years later, he's out here, and we're working on another project together. And I think that's really nice. It's a nice story, isn't it? And so we put this thing together, and he helped because he's become a writer and is doing very well for himself. And he was going to direct this, but we hit a few problems about him being able to direct out here. And so we're now ready to go ahead with the pilot. And I hope you will all agree with me that fingers, toes need to be very strongly crossed that we go ahead with the series in May. And if we do, I've finally got something that I wanted and worked towards. I wouldn't have been able to have done it before. And that's a comedy television series that is completely different, and it is. Completely different to anything that's been done in the States, completely different to anything that's been done in America, and completely different to anything that's been done over here.
Are you planning to do this for the ABC?
No. We want to make money. Which is why we're co-producing it as well. No, we're going with 10. So really, I'm just rather excited at the moment. It's been hard work, very hard work, but pleasurably hard work. So that's where I'm at now. So now we're just waiting to find out. Of course, we've worked out the synopsis for the next series, not this series, follow-up, but another series, and I've also worked out with Penny the synopsis for $1 billion comedy science fiction movie. That is a project that we're looking at for about 6 years' time, which is how far you think ahead in this business. I mean, people don't realise it, but you're thinking so far ahead of when people actually get to see what you do. So if we can pull these next 2 gigs off, then we're going to do a comedy sci-fi. Fun!
I assume that one of the questions everybody asks you is what's your favourite monster? But I'm going to ask something slightly different. Is there any monster that you had to work with that for any reason you couldn't? Like every time you saw it, you just fell over laughing or...
John Levine is the other one. John Levine had, I just have to tell you this, John Levine had an extraordinary knack of making me laugh machine or something like that, some little tiny point. And suddenly, John Levine, who's very lovely, excuse me, sir, governor, very much like that, John. Excuse me, Mr. Director, excuse me, he said, what would you like me to do? Well, by this time the director was, he was very frazzled and very worried and all those things. He said, oh, I don't know, go and do something on the filing cabinet. At which point, John Levine got up on the filing cabinet and did a tap dance. Well, I have to tell, I was sent out the rehearsal room 3 times, because every time John looked at me, I went, ah! I was on the floor, that awful crying laughter. And the more somebody tells you to be quiet, like at school, the more you laugh. And then they ask you what you're laughing at, which makes you laugh even more. And that happened, and John just had that effect on me. Every time John Levine and I see each other, look at each other, we just laugh. So, now where were we? Monsters, yeah. Let me see. Well, of course, the one that always really did tickle my fancy is the one that used to wear a curtain and look like a pickled cucumber. Alpha Centauri. And actually, John, he had that funny voice, and I had to have that all explained to me because I didn't know what they were. What is the word? Worms are it. Hermaphrodites. And John had to take me away into a quarter and tell me what hermaphrodites were. I said, no! And John spent a lot of his time explaining lots of things to me because I was just at that age where I really wanted to know a lot more than I already knew, if you see what I mean. And when you start to work with actors, they start using all sorts of words I've never heard before. And but hermaphrodite was John's favourite explanation to me. And coccyx. I knew what they were, but I wasn't allowed to say it. Do you know that? I think that's fascinating. I had to, fall over or something, and the line was, oh, they could bruise me coccyx, right? And they came in for producers' run, and that's what they do when you're doing producers' run. They stand around and tut, shake their heads and make notes, which makes you very paranoid. Because they always seem to do it when you've just said something, and then they go. And it makes you, it's very hard to act, and then this close to you. Anyway, I was told that I wasn't allowed to say coccyx. And it was a word that was banned. I know, I can't tell you any more than that. And I ended up by saying that my tailbone or something, which I think is even more ridiculous. There we are.
I saw that episode the other day at home, and John Pertwee was allowed to say, yes, it's your coccyx, the line after. Is that because the producer was sexist or something?
Really?
It's the time monster.
Because we had an hour's discussion about me saying coccyx. That's the way I said it. But it really, it's absolutely true. That's not even a slight exaggeration, which quite often I do, but that's not one.
John was very famous for ad-libbing.
Pardon?
John Pertwee was very famous for ad-libbing on the set when people weren't expecting it, but he was ad-libbing.
Oh, I love that. I'm all for that. A lot of actors, they get so angry. I've worked with actors who, torn strips off me if I've ad-libbed. John didn't, and I used to love it. I found it fascinating because you have to really listen if somebody's going to do that to you, and it just makes everything just that much more natural and real. Oh, John was great, especially when I used to cover up the words that he'd written down when it was very complicated. And sometimes, I remember once in the Sea Devils, he had to be giving somebody an injection, and he'd written the things on the lid of this tin, and I was holding the tin open because I got carried away acting, didn't I? And of course I closed the lid, and he's going, Joe, Joe. And another time, we had to do, in the Claws of Axos, we had to do this thing where a lot of, I don't think it ever came to the screen, what we actually had to do, because it all got very complicated. But part of it might have got there, where there was, to keep me from being hypnotised or whatever it was, taken by this machine or monster, I get confused, but something. He had to make me do all these incredible mathematics, and he couldn't remember them, and because he couldn't remember them, the answers I would get to give him were going to be wrong, weren't they?
Recite 5.
Huh?
You have to recite 5.
all that. There was a lot more to it when we actually did it than what actually went out. And so John said, oh, do you have it written down on the studio floor? Yeah, no worries, John, mate. So, well, they didn't talk like that then. And so they wrote it all down on the floor. And it came to the actual take. And of course, BBC special effects, they're always there. If you're in a cave where there's lots of rocks, they'll bring their own. And so there they were with their smoke machines, weren't they? Just before we went, they went, shh. And John went, ah. And I went, ooh. And it was wonderful because, you know, it always used to lighten the tension that was there, that this was always gone. Because John and I had a lot of fun. And with all those sort of moments go to make up the, all my cups leaking. Sorry. I've lost myself now. Where was I? Who am I? Where am I? Oh, yes, ad-libbing. So John was wonderful. John, because of, but once again, really only if you have the experience as an actor, as John has, can you really afford to ad-lib that much. If you ask a young, I'm very sticky, excuse me. If you ask a young actor, if you ask a young actor to ad-lib, he panics. I mean, he just panics. And so that's something I learned from John, is the ability to take that character onward and to have the courage just to say whatever came in. Because usually if you're in character, it will come out in character anyway. But, so, excuse me, have you got the moist towelettes that were stolen from the plane? But ad-libbing is very specialised. Not that many people can do it. Some do it, but not successfully. There's nothing worse than an ad-lib that is not clever, not funny, thank you, or whatever.
Speaking of ad-libs, beginning of Cannibal Monsters.
You're not ad-libbing, are you?
There was this scene at the beginning of Cannibal Monsters with chickens, which describes what actually was ad-lib.
We're ready for it. I'll start, I told this story earlier, if anybody's heard it, now's the time to go Katy. When I was quite young, obviously, I did a lot of ballet, but I was always a very talkative ballet dancer, and this is why I became an actress, really. And one of the things I used to do was sit in my bath and practice what I could do with my voice, i.e. not accents and things. And during that period of time, I still do it, during that period of time, I came up with all sorts of things I could do. And at last, John Pertwee found a use for something that I can do. And that's chicken noises. And in what was it called? Carnival of Monsters. There was one scene we were sort of walking around one of the passages on the ship, and there was these chickens in a crate or whatever, chicken home, whatever you call those things, a Kentucky Fried Box. Poor darlings. They didn't know they were going to have 1,000 herbs and spices for them. Anyway, so there was this chicken box, and John said, go on, do it. I said, oh, I couldn't. He said, go on. So we say, do what? Do what? He said, she's going to communicate with those chickens. Because there was nothing going on for a moment or two. I don't know, they were reloading or whatever it is. And so I did. And I don't know whether any of you remember, I'm going to get close to the mic with a small effect. Are you ready? And I can do it laughing or straight-faced. I just thought you'd like to know that too. And of course, we did it, and they had the camera on it, and they kept it in, didn't they? So there was another side to Jo, was the fact she was obviously going to go into variety. And because John used to love it, because John is a very well known in England. I'm sure a lot of people, especially the slightly older generation, remember that he is a man that has been known for his ability with voices. I mean, he could change it. He used to do the postman, in a show called, anybody know? I can't remember. He played this wonderful sort of Cornish postman. Doesn't matter what you do with my dear as long as you tear him up. And well, of course, you see in Wurzel, I mean, John's ability with the voice is superb. And so we used to have a lot of fun together, because I like to do that too. And he encouraged me all the time, so consequently after that my repertoire got bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm not going to do Popeye again. Unless you really want me to. It's amazing what a little coaxing can do. Alright, are you ready? I just warm up. Here's Popeye. This, I think I probably discovered this in a bath when I was about 19, I think Popeye came about. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm good to the finish, 'cause I eats my spinach. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. And so it goes on. And so now, of course, my kids are fascinated by this, and they're all practicing these strangles. My son nearly strangles himself with Popeye. And when he brings his friends over, he says, "Oh, Mum, do Popeye for them. Go on." Right, where were we? Chickens. Well, that's the chicken story. But all those little, while we think about all those little things add to the dimensions of a character. They make that character more credible, I think. And I think when one is creating a character, that you have to start working out all the little things that make, we're all totally unique. No two of us are absolutely alike. Even my partner and I, Penny, although we're like one person, we do have our little differences. And it's when you're creating a character, those, like with Joe, you keep embellishing and embroidering to give that character much more past, because that's what makes that character believable and acceptable. And if you don't have those dimensions in a character, when you often watch somebody, you think, oh, I didn't think they were very good. It's often because you're watching a very one-dimensional performance without all those lovely bits of embroidery that make that person a living, breathing human being whose heart works, who has emotions, who has past stories to tell. And that's one of the exciting things about acting, is creating a character, especially when you're in a series, because that can grow. It's not just like a one-off where you have to have it all ready to show there. That character gets a chance to grow and change. And say something like Doctor Who's Joe. Joe started there and grew and became very different. If you look at episode 1 that I was in, and you look at the last episode, the character has grown enormously and has changed quite a bit, in actual fact, as one does. So you get that lovely opportunity to keep adding those little things. Chickens, no.
Very short silence with your picture. Were there any occasions when it sort of became dangerous?
Well, I mean, the reason that John held my hand all the time was because I couldn't see where I was going. I didn't have contact lenses in those days. I do have very bad eyes. In fact, I think they can't make contact lenses quite strong enough, so I can only wear contact lenses for sort of getting around. I can't read properly with them, and I certainly can't watch television with them, or movies, or theatre, or anything like that. But this is days before I had contact lenses, because they could only make hard contact lenses in those days, and I couldn't keep those in. And so we had the situation of I not only had to learn my lines, I had to learn a set too. I had to know exactly where everything was going to be. And on the first day in the Terror for Autumns, we'd done it all with the sort of rehearsal type props, but they're never quite the same. They're bits of wood and bits of tube. It looks nothing like what you're going to get. And I sort of learned how to work with all that. And then we go into the studio for the first day of filming, and of course, they put all the real things up. And I mean, to me, it was just like, it's horrifying when you can't see, because you don't know what the hell's there. You just know it's a different blur. And I'd wear my glasses in the rehearsals, you see. And so I had to go up and I had to shake hands with John Pertwee, which we rehearsed really well. How do you do? My name's Josephine Grant. Very simple thing to do, isn't it? without your glasses on for the first take, and they buttoned up all these tubes, and it's like a great big science lab that suddenly grown there. And of course he came up, and I couldn't get my hand over the top. We were on our marks, where you give the mark to stand. And I couldn't get my hand underneath, and I couldn't get it round. So in the end, I put my hand right through all this machinery and said, "How do you do? My name's Jo Grant." And they kept it in because, once again, that coloured Jo and how she was. But I mean, they used to wave white flags at the edge of cliffs because John knew that I would just carry on running. And you would hear, you know, "Doctor!" And I mean, the number of times I fell and tripped and everything. So as I say, the hand-holding that went on was purely to guide me. And we just had so many things that happened because I just couldn't see. And as I say, I mean, it was mostly to do when we were on location, working in those kind of locations that we worked in. I mean, they were treacherous. And as I say, John was always there saying, "Wave the white," and sometimes he would stand at the edge of the cliff himself and catch me. I mean, I ran into barbed wire, my trousers fell down on a night shoot, and I thought, "This is funny, I'm running strangely." I was so busy acting away there, you know, "I must catch the doctor," and I thought, "It's funny, my little footsteps were at my knees getting..." And I was so concentrating on what I was doing and everything, and I looked down because my trousers stuck by my knee somewhere. It was a whole film crew come to a standstill. We were just hysterical. And I hadn't noticed this until way. And John was saying, he said, he said, "But I was here in front of barbed wire to stop you." Which is lovely. So I mean, you get to learn to work seeing what you see. That's really what it amounts to. Learn to live with it and work with it. And I got contact lenses about 5 years ago, so I was shocked. I suddenly started to see actors, and in the theatre I saw my first audience, and I nearly went, I got stage fright. It's the first time I'd ever seen the faces of an audience, and I actually walked out there and went, because up until then I'd never seen them. I never knew which camera was on in Doctor Who. I mean, I just aimed for them all and hoped.
Speaking of trousers, did you have any choice of what you actually wore?
No, not really. I remember once I came up with this speaking idea of what I wanted to wear and everything, what I wanted to wear, and everybody said, "Oh, no, you couldn't wear that." So that was the end of my choice. I was much more outrageous as a dresser than I was allowed to be in Doctor Who. But clothes don't, when I'm acting, it's obvious, I carefully work out everything for the character. I worked out, I think, the first outfit of Jo was with leather and things. I always felt that was, and then corduroy pants and things like that. And I sort of work out a character. But once I actually get into the situation of being that we're actually recording, or I'm in front of the audience, the clothes just, as far as I don't care what they are. You know, it's like my makeup. I spend ages doing it before I walk on stage. Once I get on, I can get into that. So I forget me and all that. And I found with Jo that really what she was given to wear worked okay. Worked fine. It certainly wouldn't have affected my performance. I had one or two things that were gross though. Hated them things.
Anything in particular?
I remember I had a brown padded quilted suit with trousers to here. I looked like a duvet.
Dallas interrupted again.
Oh, yeah.
Some clothes, the other thing that most folks use for hair, and I thought you'd like to comment on one wig you didn't like wearing in Time Monster. These things that grew on the top of your head.
Yeah, yes. Oh, I think it was like working with a bungalow on your head. I mean, it was unbelievable. You know, it's like looking through a horse's tail apart from there. I hate wearing wigs, and obviously when you do period work, apart from nails, you usually have to, and I have the most unruly hair in the world, so people often suggest, "Wouldn't you like to wear a wig, dear?" And I really find it hard to work in wigs. Terribly hard, but that was a monster. They put something like 7 hair pieces on my head. Real hair, so it wasn't that lovely nylon stuff that bounces around. It was real hair, and the weight of this, I mean, I was walking around trying to act. I find it very hard to work with that kind of thing stuck on my head. And I think I had all that bit hair. roller stuck in the side of my hair. And it's a wonderful photograph. And you know, I have a feeling that I actually played a scene with it in. Which, I mean, it's a wonderful touch. Probably went unnoticed by the 95% of the people watching. It's lovely. There's Jo with all these curls and she's going to a dance and she's all frocked up. She's got one calm and roll. It's lovely.
Any more questions?
Oh.
Do people recognise you in the streets?
You mean now? It's wonderful. People look at me and they say, nearly everybody picks that I'm an actress, like taxi drivers and people. A surprising amount, I won't say a lot, I'll say a surprising amount of people recognise me from Doctor Who. A surprising amount recognise me from something else that I did in the UK. But the number of people who think they know me, and then you sort of say, well, you know, they say, well, you look awfully like. Who's the one I get most of all? Is Susanna York. I get Susanna York constantly. And then I get a lot of Pamela Stevenson. Because I had long hair just recently, it was all crimped and stuff. But it's that thing of, you know, people see me and they know from somewhere, but it's that many years later that isn't that apparent, which is, I find it embarrassing now, actually. I didn't used to, but I do now. I flush slightly. I don't mind people saying, oh, you must be an actress. I mean, cop that. But I find it fairly embarrassing. I find myself looking at my knees and thinking, it's the deal. I guess because it was a long time ago. I guess it was because it was 13, 14 years ago. I was amazed that anybody would recognise me that many years later. And I mean, when I did it in England, I couldn't go anywhere. And I like to travel by bus. I'm a walker, and of course in England I still carried on with my same old lifestyle. Because you can imagine what my life was filled with, sitting on the tube with people saying, "Here, where's your TARDIS?" I mean, you know, everybody had the same cry. And I don't know. I mean, my attitude to it all now is, as I say, just faintly embarrassing. Then I don't know how I felt about it. I don't really remember. And in America, in America, I was allowed to go shopping for half an hour with 2 bodyguards. And we were in Chicago. And people were sort of saying, oh, you're Katy now. And I was flabbergasted. I mean, I was absolutely flabbergasted that people they were really bored. But of course then they've only just got our episodes up there. But even so, that many years later, I'm still surprised. I mean, it was a bit like going through it all over again. It's very strange. But they were just the man in the street was going, oh. So it is interesting. Interesting trip.
Right then, for the next 15 minutes or so, we'll depart and Katy will have the stage by herself, and anyone would like to ask questions?
Thank you. Wait, excuse me.
There's one other thing, we were talking about sea levels earlier. I don't know if you remember this, but I think you rode a motorbike at one stage.
Yes, I couldn't actually ride a bike.
I was
but I
just
did
going to ask
ride
how
it.
much experience you had with a bike.
None.
None at
I've
all.
never been on a bike in my life before.
Did you tell me you produced this?
No. I just thought, well, if I get on it, something will happen. I've been on a motor scooter and I've been on a moped, so I think, what's the difference?
Lovely devices and you can ride on things.
We both used to just disappear off on any piece of machinery we give, we just zoom off. And they say, they've got a new toy. But
There's little 3-wheel motorbikes and that.
that's right, that's wonderful. We got told off for disappearing on that. We got told off for doing a lot of things we did. And we used to, I abseiled. I've never abseiled before. One thing I did discover, if you've never done it before, it rips your hands open. And we had to go for a second take. And I wasn't going to tell anybody that I'd done this because I'd already said I could do it. So it's really, you just sort of life your way. Because if you don't do it once, you'll never learn how to do it. Basically, that was my story. The only thing with the motorbike was I didn't know how the hell to stop it. So I pretended I was going off on a little ride. And eventually some of the technical boys, some of the boys realised that I actually didn't know what to do, so they just sort of very quietly helped me stop. But I needed to do that. I needed
Bessie? Or would you
No, John wouldn't let me drive Bessie. He was so possessive about Bessie. Bessie was John's baby and he never let me drive her. We had our first argument with Bessie. One and only argument in 3 years, which I think is pretty amazing actually, considering we were together day in, day out. And that was over something he said about the director, and I suddenly looked at him and we'd been waiting hours to do the shot, and we were really tired. And we were under this great big golfing umbrella, and suddenly all the people outside suddenly just saw this great big golfing umbrella with lots of flying objects coming up from under it. It was me just throwing anything up to lay my hands on it. I said to him, do you want to direct this or do you want to act it? It was one of those. He was saying what should be done and what shouldn't be done, and at that particular point I found it irritating. We had our first round, and everybody was staggered on set because, I mean, you know, we never had even words, but he wouldn't let me drive Bessie.
Did you ever take yourself from doing all these things that you pretended you could do in your
Yes,
like,
a lot.
for instance?
Well, I really did destroy the palms of my hands out sailing. I pulled all the ligaments in my foot. I hurt and bruised myself a lot, and then also I had to swing down a rope. I think it was in the Sea Devils. Not only did I hurt myself, they'd given me a nylon rope. And if you've ever tried going from probably the top of that balcony there, down to there, sliding down a rope, because it's nylon, you know what's going to happen, don't you? And of course you burn yourself. But my hand suffered a lot. And also, I hurt another actor who was in it. He was just climbing up through this little loft thing, and I sort of kicked him in a very unfortunate place. I was terribly embarrassed about that. But it was mostly bruises and things like that. On the whole, because I danced for so many years, I'm really quite, you know, supple. And I know how to sort of fall and things like that. It helped. I think dancing does give you that little bit extra when it comes to doing things for yourself. It looks better too, doesn't it? When you're watching a television program and you can see the face of the person doing the stunt, rather than cut away, you see the back of their head, and then when they fall, you cut away to something else and you see them roll on the floor. I find it works in a much more realistic way if you can actually see the actor doing his stunt, even though the insurance is the problem. Any more questions?
Did you think the writing was sexist?
Well, look, in those days, you see, now the Americans came up with this a lot. You see, they're watching something that was made 14 odd years ago, the one I was in. And this was a big thing they had about the John Pertwee type thing. And what I had to say to them, that there was a very different attitude then. And so, sure, it was of that era. I was playing it absolutely up to the minute. Just women were beginning to stand up and say, oi, wait a minute. And I was just at the beginning of the birth, really, there obviously have always been groups of women who have stood up and said this, but it was just at the beginning. And I was of an age when I hadn't really got all that together. I'd been so busy doing and learning my trade. It hadn't dawned on me. I knew a lot of the older plays that were performed, Chekhov, people like all a bit sexist. They're all a bit strange as well. But it really wasn't a thing as it is now. And of course, now you can look at it and say, yeah, sure as hell was. But, one has to look at that era of Doctor Who of being absolutely spot on. I mean, Joan was very much a now person then. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? She really was. She was dressed, her attitudes were the modern miss. But that modern miss now looks frankly very old-fashioned. So, it's one of those things you can't really bring that into something that was made in a period like that. Obviously, as Sarah came into it, it was very much a liberated woman that you saw. She was also in a business like journalism, which would have given her more ability to be liberated. I was straight out of school in terms of Jo. She hadn't really been into the world, and she spent most of her time outside the world anyway, where I don't think sexism comes into it, does it? Especially if they're all people cucumbers. It's a whole different thing.
Actually, what do you think of the some companions that replaced you?
I think they've all been terrific. as much as I have seen, I liked Sarah Jane. I liked Tegan. Nissa was a harder part to play. I think that's the problem there, because she was from another planet. I tell you, I know a lot of people really did like the character. I'm not talking about the actor. The character of the girl who Liz Johnson. What's the character's name?
Liz Shaw.
No, not Liz Shaw.
Oh, Leela.
Leela. I found that character contrived. I don't know. I know it worked, especially for the chaps, but I found it a contrived character. I don't know why. I don't think I can even begin to tell you why, but somehow I just couldn't quite get it. Maybe I didn't see enough of it. Who knows? Just didn't quite get that character. I like the chappie with the red hair, schoolboy type look. Yeah, I like that introduction of that character because I thought there was lots of facets to him. Sort of like almost a young doctor in a lot of ways. I liked him. I didn't care for the boy walking around with the sacks on his legs and things. I couldn't get into him at all. I didn't believe him. And one of the things I can honestly say to you here, if you're doing something like Doctor Who, if you don't make the characters 100% believable, then it will not work, because you're dealing with a completely unbelievable situation. So the characters have to believe in what they're doing. Never can you send up something like Doctor Who. You can in the rehearsal room, get rid of it, but you can't send it up when you're doing it. And I never quite believed that he believed what he was saying and doing, for what it's worth. What other companions have there been?
Lala Ward.
No, I didn't care for Lala Ward a lot. I don't think... no, I didn't care for Lala Ward. I think that was my least favourite. Not Lala Ward. Once again, you have to say this, otherwise it's actually being, you're saying, oh. But I didn't care for... If she was going to be a female doctor, then we needed an awful lot more guts in there. A lot more. That. She had more, but I don't think the conception of the doctor being a woman has ever worked thus far. It was which one was it that was supposed to have been? Lala Ward was a Time Lord, wasn't she? And what was Mary Tamm? Ah, right. Well, then the concept didn't work. I mean, as I said, forget the acting, but the concept didn't work from either of the characters. There just wasn't the strength. And there wasn't, once again, all those facets that we talked about, say, Tom Baker having, didn't come out in those two girls. I mean, obviously it's got something to do with performances, but I don't think the idea was terrific, personally.
Did you like Harry Sullivan?
Who?
Harry Sullivan? Do you remember that guy? Ian Martin.
Oh, Ian. Oh, I'll tell you a story about that. Tell me if you've had enough, because I can stop. Ian Marta was originally, you look a little bit like Ian, actually, sitting there in that suit.
Well, my suit, yeah.
I did in the Carnival of Monsters, Ian was in that.
Yes.
Right. Ian was originally, this is why Ian's been so along with Doctor Who, he was originally going to be what Richard Franklin was. And then they somehow, I don't know, I think it was an age difference for Ian and I, but it wouldn't quite work. But they've always wanted Ian Marter in it. They have always wanted Ian Marter because he's a damn fine actor. He then got very sick for a long time and sort of didn't do very much. He was very, very sick. And now, of course, he's back again. But that was originally the character that I was going to have as a... But when they cast me... I must tell you that I didn't know this exactly before. This was their original conception. When they were casting, they had shortlisted, when I went for the interview, they'd already shortlisted 3 girls. Do you know who those 3 girls were? And that's why Ian Martin would have fitted in, because they were much older and everything. And they were, because one of them was Shakira Kane, who's Michael Caine's unbelievably stunning wife. She was their #1. Then there was a girl called Katy Wyatt, who was a Swedish bombshell, right? And one other person I can't remember. And I walked in late. They'd already shortlisted it to 3, and they would decide between those 3 when I came in. And they went with me. So obviously there was quite a difference really gorgeous looking girl up there, only unfortunately they can't for me. But that was the original casting, which I think is interesting, that they were going for glamour. They were definitely going for glamour. So they definitely changed their minds when they got me. And as I say, then Ian Marta had also already been sort of chosen across because he would have worked with them very well. But for me, it was the wrong age group, etc. So that's when they got in my case. Just a little bit of nonsense for me. Does anybody else have any deep, burning, wonderful questions?
How much for the actors?
I thought we were going to say how much did the actors get, and I was going to say not a lot. As they trusted you more and more. I mean, there was one mistake that they wrote for me. Some writers came in to write one where, I don't know, we go back to Croesus and wherever we went. Ingrid Pitt being the, yes. Anyway, the writers had really thought they'd got me, because I was really young and hip and groovy then, I have to tell you. I mean, it was, you know, the Beatles, the hippie, I mean, everybody was just far out, man. You know, and I was a little bit that way. You know, I was into all that. And so these writers had met me and they thought, oh yeah, we've got her, we know how to make. And they wrote, now this answers a lot of things we were talking about earlier about the character and what I put in and it was me, which it wasn't really. So they wrote it like Katy Manning sort of was. And it was ghastly, it was unactable. Because it was all, you know, there she is, standing there in Minoan times, saying, well, that's a groovy frock. And I couldn't, the words stuck in my throat and I went, I can't say this. I cannot do it this way. So I rewrote it for Joe. You see, I really did create Joe as a character. Joe was not me. There's no way, because if Joe had been me, she would have been something really different. And that was interesting, because when they thought, they wrote around me, not Joe, so it was wrong. And yes, we did rewrite a lot. We wrote escapes that worked on paper, but when you came to do them, the escape didn't work, it was illogical. And John and I were very keen on that. John especially, and I learned from him. It had to be real, it had to be truthful, it had to be logical. So Roger, John and I spent a lot of time rewriting. Not because the scripts are bad, but certain little moments just didn't work. And we were quite capable of actors, as actors. I mean, if I do a stage play now, you know, sometimes a play that worked 6 years ago is not going to work the same now because times have changed. And, you know, you rewrite it. I enjoyed it. A lot of actors don't, I do. So that was good. We all enjoyed working on it. Making it for us, making it the characters we create. Good. A lovely silence. Befell all.
You want to do something with one of these things? I don't have to talk about.
Which one, Dallas? It's good at this.
The airplane, the rehearsal?
Oh, yes. John and I rather like to play with things. Anything. I mean, you know, I'm one of these people, if there's a pinboard up, I'm always playing. Props, they're fun. Props are great fun. And we were, suddenly one day, I don't know, we was divine inspiration. We took every prop in the rehearsal room and we started to make something. And that something started to turn into a, doing it, you know, started to turn into an aeroplane. And before we knew where we were all so desperately involved in this airplane. All the actors and all the props were in this corner of the room where we made, I can only tell you, because you can't see it, we made the most wonderful aeroplane in the whole world. We even found an old British Airways bag. And we posed, somebody had a camera, and we posed in front of this aeroplane, right? And John put a white scarf on and he found some sort of a hat and put it on backwards so he looked like one of the first people ever to fly in a plane. And then he put my glasses on because they're really thick and made him just look hysterical. And then we had the brig looking very much like your steward. And I'm there as the stewardess and we were sort of, you know, finding bits of material. We made clothes. I mean, I can't... And the next thing we hear is a clearing of the throat. It was a day of a producer's run, and the producer had walked in. I know the director was having a production meeting with him, and while they were gone, this is what we did. It was Barry there, so he walked in to see that these, oh, listen to me, I'm and I thought, well, let's go. And he was just absolutely staggered that that's what the actors that he was paid to do a job were doing. They were out there like a bunch of kids going, oh, look at them, can do that, that make a tail, and that. There wasn't a prop left. And he walked in there with all that, you get the cameraman, the lighting, and sound. Everybody comes in and they sort of follow you around as you do your little rehearsal. Because we had to, Barry had such a lovely sense of humour, he was such a nice man that it was okay. I can't imagine there'd be one or two other producers who wouldn't have been so thrilled to find that his actors were having such a good time. But it was lovely, and that was the atmosphere. That's the story that indicates. John and I had a toy for, and we tried foot painting once, and things like that. Or the cleaner threw his paintings away, but mine were left. But it was that sort of an atmosphere that when we weren't actually grafting really hard, which we did, we had great fun, and we worked like a team. A good team in any business should work, and that's together, and enjoy doing everything together. And that's, as I say, that's the sort of crew I work with, and I really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed that a lot. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the other people have had the same sort of experiences, but those going on mine, it's great.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for a question and answer session. I'd like to thank Katy for...
Terrific years in front of it, and the more people that sort of enjoy it, the longer I think it may last.
Okay, that's not the end of Katy for the day, but she is going to have a break for a while now.
All together now. Oh yes, it is.
There has been a slight change in the program to allow Katy to have a little bit of a rest.
I should go to Lou. I think we're
We're not going to have the photographic session now. We're going to have the second panel. Followed by, we're going to combine the autograph session 2 and the photograph session. Because most people already have the autograph session, which is anyway.
The crowd!
Second panel for the day is target books, for and against. This is, we take the style of a debate, at which at the end, our massive audience out there will decide who they, in their mind, which team provided the best argument. On the affirmative side, we have Derek Binns, Karen Herx and Craig Wellington, and on the negative side, we have Tim Richards and Russell Devlin. And we'll hand over to the first on the affirmative side, Derek Binns.
Right, thanks Jamie. I will not steal your notes. Now, I probably won't have a good argument, seeing as I only found I was on this panel about 7 minutes ago. Right, now, I believe that the good points of the target novelisations are that they can allow the reader to go into a depth that was not in itself explained in the story. And I take, for example, Warriors of the Deep. Now, the character of Dr. Solo came across to me as pretty much a megalomaniac, but then when I read the book, I found out that she was in fact very insecure and very indecisive about what she herself was doing. And this gave me different ideas of her character. And another point of the target books is they allow stories like The Highlanders, which no longer exist, for people who didn't get to see it. Right, I shall hand it over to Karen.
And now to the first speaker on the negative, Richard.
Well, perhaps just to talk technical. Right. I think target novelisations are a good concept. I think they're an excellent idea, make an excellent souvenir of Doctor Who, but I think they're a good concept that's been very poorly executed. I agree that they're fine for old stories that we haven't seen. That's probably one of the best purposes for them. But when you get something like the Aztecs, when the Doctor is not described at all, not what he looks like, none of the companions, it's just, it seems pointless in a way. I mean, surely the part of the interest in it is translating the visual into the, into the written form, and so we should hear what the doctor looks like, what he's wearing, all this. And I think it's a pity that hasn't been done in some books. Some books, of course, are better in that respect, but they're very inconsistent. It's very hard to see that they have any consistent quality in them. Of course, there's, perhaps we could go on to something else. I mean, just the very price of the books is a rip-off for the actual page number, but I mean, that's a side point. I mean, that has something to do with target, not the content, of course. I just feel, and some are very shallow, they really are just the script with he said after the, or she said after the bits of dialogue. Microphone, right? Yeah. Terrence Dix is a fine example. And it got to the point where it's just mass-produced. Terrence Dix probably writes one in a month and then does another one and another one. And you can really tell. And it's a pity because they're not going to be rewritten. We're going to have to live with those ones. And I think the idea of novelising really recent ones is a bit of a pity sometimes because it's just, we've seen them so recently and they could be novelising other old ones we haven't seen. So I just think, personally, it's a good idea that a very poorly executed concept just basically making money from the target, which is, is their right arm business, but at the expense of fans in some respects. Perhaps Russell can expand on that a bit later.
Thanks, Tim. Now we'll hand over to the second speaker, who happens to have reams and reams of notes here. For the affirmative side, Karen Herx.
Our audience has been reading. I think so, yeah. Okay. In favour of target novels. Firstly, to refute some of the points that Tim has made. Hello, Tim. Well, you missed out. Now, one cannot deny that, however, some may view target novels, they are very, very popular. So, using an old cliche, 10,000 people can't be wrong. The price is not different from any other current paperback novel put out by Target in Australia. One can't forget that the original concept was that they should be children's novels, and taken as such, they are indeed excellent. Right. So, going on to something else entirely different. I have to get away from the points that you raised before. Divorced from the series itself, Target Doctor Who novels are fairly well written in the main, but you've got to remember that they are written by different authors. You can't just say, oh, all Target Doctor Who novels are bad. Some Target Doctor Who novels are bad. Some Target Doctor Who novels are good. Some are so-so, and some are absolutely excellent. You can't lump your Target Doctor Who book into one bookshelf. Right, carrying on. My God. In defence, once you may have heard the story about this particular journalist who was working in a Chicago university. He asked 5 different students to describe to him exactly the same incident, to submit to him stories of particular incidents. When he got them back, he discovered that each version of the story was totally different, because different people see emphasis on different aspects of an incident. The same applies to the Target novels. You or I, or Tim, or anybody else who's against them, watches Doctor Who, and we gain a particular impression. That's our own impression of a particular story. Now, Terrence Dix and all those other lovely people have done exactly the same thing. They've watched the program and they've got an impression of it and they write their own version. So fans tend to complain that they find that target novels aren't an accurate portrayal of a particular story. And this can only be because of that they've seen it in a different light. And also the other thing that we've got to remember is we've seen it more often than they have. Yeah, have we? Have we? Well, actually, they're working from a script and some memories. We have seen them again and again. No, it's only recently they've done little videos. And so we may have got a better idea of what exactly is happening in a particular story. To go back to the point that you made, the one thing that I do like about target novels is in-depth characterisation. That's true. Some of them. I told you not to lump them all into one basket. As I said before, there's some good target novels and there are some bad target novels, but I'd rather have them than not have them. What was I? Oh, characterisation. You cannot portray audio-visually in-depth characterisation or motivations of any particular minor character or guest star, but you can do it in a novel. I think that's all I've got to say.
Don't I give a clap for that?
And now we'll pass on to the second member for the negative side, Russell Devlin.
Yeah, well, first of all, rather than sort of, just sort of launch into an immediate tirade against certain people sitting over there, I'll state the major case. Basically, the target novels, really when it comes down to it, they're a load of hack work for the kiddywinks. The writing quality of the novels is generally inferior to the actual show. Often the dialogue is changed subjectively for the worst. Often events are changed. Also, sometimes they put in things in which sort of would no way actually occur in the mythology of the show, and then they get dredged up by people like Richard Landon in their various reviews and become annoying and promote sort of mistakes in terms of the show. Let's see. Also, my other main criticism is that they seem to lack sort of any real sort of style. Like, think of a famous author or science fiction author or general author, they do tend to sort of have a certain style about them. Like Bradbury, or even someone sort of more pedestrian like Asimov. They're just sort of something, sort of grabs you in, like the style of a particular television program is. Like, sort of Doctor Who has a certain style, in the different eras, also the Avengers has a certain style, and the target books, they tend to lack that sort of thing. As my friend here was saying, often it is sort of just the he said type thing. There's a lack of description of the characters. So much for ad libbing. I was holding upside down, sorry. Just talk among yourselves, I'm doing this. I've got things to say now. Oh no, come on, you think of something, keep me going. I draw out. Oh yes, that's right. Going back to the children's novels bit. Now, okay, we were saying, they're written for children, but that's not really the general audience. Also, a child can often read a book intended for adults, and adults can read it too and enjoy it. But often, if you sort of show a target book to most people over 20, they'll just sort of cringe at it because it's so badly written, and sort of it'll be style of it will just be sort of, so annoying to them. Like, say, take for example, the Doctor Who and the Daleks book. The writing style of that, it's the sort of thing you used to get in, schoolboy annuals, that sort of thing, and suddenly it was big. Well, okay, I'll rephrase myself. I said good style. Oh, I know that, but just sort of the way it is, like it's held up to be one of the most famous, one of the best novelisations, and that. But really, also when you compare it to the original script, it's a hell of a lot different. The Daleks itself is a lot more adult story than you would ever think from the Doctor Who and the Daleks novelisation. So much in any way. Where was I? Just have a look here. did see. Oh, also too, another annoying fact, very much the target range, is say if you have a particularly long story, they'll edit it down so that it's a four-parter or you know, sometimes a six-parter. It's almost, it reads as a four-parter, like for example, War Games novelisation. Like admittedly, that was based on the original script, but you know, you just read it, it sort of bears no relation to what they finally shot. And I think really, these sort of books, you want sort of something which is a permanent record of the way the show was, and you know, if they sort of change so much, and even when they do change it, they don't introduce any sort of what's the word? Any new elements into it which would really expand it. If anything, they constrict it. What was next?
And now the final speaker on the affirmative side, Craig Wellington.
Okay, although Russell stated that the books are meant to be dribbled for the kiddie winks, that's exactly what they are written for, the kids, although they may not all be dribbled.
Yeah, that's another thing too, not terribly cost effective.
Cost effective?
Well, let's see, I mean, a company would take to get through something like this with similar price, say, you know, science fiction paperback by an or an anthology, I mean, you know,
Okay, well look at it then. It's not going to take you very long to get through a Doctor Who book, but the fact is you've got to remember Doctor Who is a television series and the novelisation is something completely different, and it's most noticeable in the Five Doctors where Doctor 1 says this and Doctor 2 says that, and it must be very difficult for authors like Terence Dix with a mentality like he's got to write stories that with a mentality like he's got to write stories that, you know, he has to incorporate so many characters who are the same and write Doctor 1 and Doctor 2, whereas on screen we see it happening. And I think characterisation comes through the books without actually having to aid it by the authors. For example, the guy who wrote Marco Polo didn't do a lot for the characters, but the original story itself does a good job for the characters, and you can follow, and it's really beneficial, especially for people like me who never saw Marco Polo, to be able to see the book, to read the books like that. Okay, keeping going with the style, at the other end of the scale you've also got the Donald Cottons, who have been nominated recently for the Roundtree International Book Award for such wonderful books as The Mythmakers, and finally, I bet that you have bought and read the Target books and that you enjoyed them. Some of them, most of them.
Can I ask a question? Afterwards, I've got a question ready.
Now, due to the fact that it's 3 against 2, one member of the negative side will cap up their argument.
I won't take long on this. I was just going to say that the point that, you know, you're saying that aren't written for children, well, I'm saying they shouldn't be written entirely for children. They should be written as a good souvenir of the show. Kids don't need to be talked down to. They can handle it. What's that?
The original show doesn't.
It doesn't talk, yeah, the original show doesn't talk down to kids. Right, so, yeah. But another bad point is, that, you know, I feel that you can have all the dialogue and the events that happen in the show are just much better brought out than with background material, but without changing it. An example of change for the bad is Earthshot. Ian Martin novelized that. He just about changed every bit of dialogue. It still meant the same, but it was changed. It's not a very good souvenir of the show. Yeah. No, I knew that. I mean, you just read the thing, it's obvious. I mean, it's okay to bring out background stuff, but changing the actual, you know, events and things is ridiculous. More effort should be made to get the quality into them, not just numbers of books. I mean, Terence Dix is churning them out one after another, and he hasn't got a style. He just, well, I should say, some are better than others, yeah. But in that stage, like, he's written a whole 15th season. I commend you to that season of books for a truly bad example of how to do them. And I think you can look at, I mean, in-depth characterisation, there's not many with them. Okay, there are some good ones, for sure, some stand out. But I mean, really, they could just put more effort. There should be a larger page count. You can buy a good science fiction novel, over 200 pages for $5.95. These things cost $4.50 and they're less than half the size. I mean, it's ridiculous. They really are just obviously making money out of fans. Yes, I have bought them because I can't buy anything else. But I wouldn't recommend a single one of the target novelisations to someone as a novel that should be read in its own right. I don't think they'd enjoy it without having seen the series. I haven't read The Mythmakers. I would not even highlight it. No, not really. Anyway, that's about all I've got to say. It was just a quick sum up. So I'll let hand over to Jamie, get the questions.
Okay. Yeah. Another thing too, like when I was making my comments, they are generalisations. These days, of course, I think because they've realised that the earlier comments were made on sort of lack of style, or if they do have a style that's rather childish and schoolboy animalish, they do sort of tend to be getting the original writers to do them. And some of the original writers, they do in fact have a certain style of their own, so they're starting to make them more distinctive, like they were saying the Mythmakers and the Gunfighters novels are very different from anything that Terrance Dicks would do. And sort of it's and in this case, sort of it did certainly enhance the original scripts because they were bad Doctor Who stories on television, but they're good Doctor Who books because they were sort of done as they're supposed to be comedies initially, but they didn't play too well as comedies. But in the books they do. So there we are.
That concludes the panel. No, we can't accept anymore. We're running short of time. We will now have a few questions from the audience. I know Dallas has got one straight off. After which we'll ask the audience's reaction to either the affirmative or the positive. So if there's a question, Dallas?
Right, every panellist can answer. Have they read every Target novel? Yes.
Okay, I've read the entire collection and there wouldn't be one I haven't read twice, and I've read a lot, more than 6 or 7 times. That's how warped I am.
Is that what happened? I wondered. I would say I've read all of them and I've enjoyed them. But as I've said before, and I'll say again, I tend to take things very much at face value, and whether that's an indication of that, I don't know.
I have all 95 that have been published so far in Australia, and with the exception of one, I've reread them at least twice, so I think that should answer your question.
How many times have you read them, Jamie?
Well, I won't say I've read them all because I haven't.
You read the Junior Caves of Actors only.
Because I haven't read any of the new Target novels for the last 12 months, mainly because most of them have been just recent stories, for example, Awakening and things like that.
Yeah, well, a similar sort of thing, I think. I bought them all up till about number 90, but since then they've had some older ones, but since then I think for your money there's a hell of a lot more interesting Doctor Who merchandise and things you can get at value for money, I should say. So I just haven't been buying them because I've been into other things. But I probably will end up buying the older ones, the ones that have been there.
I reckon I've probably read about 2 dozen or so. I've mainly bought the ones which, the stories, you're not going to see otherwise, or until recently you didn't think you're going to be able to see otherwise. And I figure, well, if I'm going to buy a science fiction book, I might as well buy a science fiction book that's well written, and those ones aren't.
It says it all. Next question.
What's your favourite and least favourite novels?
Okay, well, what's your least favourite and favourite novels? We'll go very quickly. We'll just have the titles, please.
Highlanders is my favourite. Caesar definitely is favourite.
I think Robots is my least favourite, and I can't think of a favourite.
In all honesty, I'd have to say the Destiny of the Daleks would have to be the worst, and I think Donald Cotton's Mythmaker is the best.
It's a bit hard to say. I think I agree that Destiny of the Daleks would be the worst. That sort of thing, you got to page 120, it was sort of just getting interesting and it stopped. You thought it was supposed to be episode 2. Well, for the best, I think just for the fact that they are sometimes better written. I think one of the older stories, perhaps either the Highlanders or the Aztecs, even without a little lack of characterisation, I thought they were okay.
Well, I would say it would probably be the Highlanders or the Mythmakers. I think really the Highlanders because I just find it a more intrinsically interesting story to begin with. But I think probably the worst I have read is The Web of Fear, not because it's a terribly, bad written story, but because that was a Doctor Who classic and you don't get an ounce of the atmosphere of the televised versions in the novelisation. Well, subjectively, of course. I think that's a solid fact.
Right. We have another question.
As the panel talks about the dichotomy, I think I heard briefly, between what is shown in television and what is written in the book, and I'd like to comment on such things as Sontaran experiment.
They have commented on it. Would anyone like to briefly answer one comment from each side? I can do that. I'll go to the affirmative.
Yeah, I think that that's where the books are better than the series, which is basically what Doctor Who is, a television show, in that they can extend everything from the shows, and that's where things like the Mythmakers, the Sontaran experiment, the Daleks, and the Awakening are first-class books, and not novels, books, because they're novelisations, because they do extend the story and are perfectly rounded off scripts, and Leisure Hive is one too.
Just briefly, I think that as they are, being in a way a souvenir of the show, that the actual events in the program and the speech, actual things people say should be precisely the same, shouldn't be altered, because that should be accurate, in other words. But I do think that things could be added in the rest of the book to give characterisation and even more interest. For example, adding the thing about little green crystal and the TARDIS in the war games is just not on. That's absolutely.
I was getting across that idea of things that in the books slowly become people believe they're in the program.
That's right, people tell you about that. But I think, for example, with Sontaran experiment, we know Harry sort of went inside the Sontaran ship. I don't think it hurts at all to just have a bit describing what it looked like inside the Sontaran ship, because it's just part of the events. It's just something we didn't see on, which is part of the flow. But saying there's a green crystal and the TARDIS, the powers, that sort of thing. You think of anything else? There's a few like that, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway.
Very quickly.
In the original Sontaran experiment, which was 4 episodes but got cut back to 2, was what happened in the novel in that script. Right. Thank you.
Right, well that's the conclusion of the panel. What we want now is a rough indication from you who you think proved the best, or put up the best argument. So anyone who thought that the affirmative side put up the best argument, please raise their hands. 3, it doesn't look very promising. Anyone who thinks the negative side proved up... right. 5. Does that mean we had some who don't know? Right, so it looks like a negative side have got it. We take no responsibility over comments made about Terence Dix. Right, so Katy Manning will be back shortly. The next event at this stage looks like being our fan guest of honour speech by Dallas Jones.
Be a short time. I'll get ready.
Right. Followed by a photographic session with Katy, and getting towards the end of the day we'll have the presentation of the double gamut and a special presentation to Katy before she runs the wax.
Wax seal, concrete.
Right.
They don't have this trouble at the awards, do they? I mean, it's all beautifully slick.
This one is the 1985 Australian Special Achievement Award, and the nominations were
Karen Perks, Anthony Howe, Paul Kennedy, Metabelis 3, Tim Richards, Time Loop, Brian Trump, The West Lodge. I open it. And 3 hours later, she's torn the name in half. Right, the official results are as follows. First, Anthony Howe. Second, Tim Richards. Third, Paul Kennedy. Fourth, Brian Trump. Fifth, The West Lodge. Sixth, Time Loop. 7, Karen Herks. 8th, Metabilis 3.
On behalf of Anthony Howard, Dallas Jones.
Dallas, may I wish you luck in your future career?
I'll just make one announcement about this. I won it last year, Tony's won it this year. I feel that this award, because of the nature of it, should be that if you win it once, you can't win it again. I don't know, but that at the moment is not what's happening. I think it should be a recognition of not just a year's work in fandom, but the whole of your work in fandom. So one of the things I'd like to see is this award made an award which you win once and only once. Thanks.
All those in favour say aye.
And the next is the 1985 Best Australian Doctor Who fanzine, and the nominations were
Data extract, Encyclopedia Chronicle, Mentalis, Time Loop, and the West Watch. Oh, isn't it exciting? And the winners are Data Extract, Mentalis, the West Lodge, Hers Chronicle, and Encyclopedia Gallifreyan. I'm sure you all know what those are, I just honestly can't pronounce them. So,
the editor, Dallas Jones.
the editor, Dallas Jones, and again.
Thanks again. I think you will notice over the last couple of months a change again in Data Extract expansion. We have so far, I think the last issue asked for a letters editor. The letters editor, there have been so far 2 people willing to do that, so it looks like the idea of letters editor for the magazine will continue, and shortly we'll see the 1985 survey. So there's things to come yet, and also, as always, the news. Thanks.
I really think it's amazing how hard people like Dallas work on things like this. I think it's just incredible. I just thought you'd like to know that. I do. I really think it's admirable.
Right, 1985 Best Australian Doctor Who fan writing.
Nominations are Tim Aldwinkle. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, fine. Michael Butcher, Steve Cruz, Paul Kennedy, Mara, and Shane Welch. And the winners are... I need a sparkly frock for this, don't I?
Lots of secrets.
Yes, lots of sequins that hit the camera and the light so that you just kind of flare. And the results are, first Paul Kennedy, then Michael Butcher, third Tim Aldwinkle, fourth Steve Cruz, fifth Shane Welch, and sixth Mara.
As Paul Kennedy's not here today, this award will be...
I'll accept it for him. No, don't.
This award will be forwarded to Paul.
Well done.
Paul says thank you very much.
Next one, the 1985 Best Australian Doctor Who fan editor.
And the nominations are, what is it, Jamie Hillard, Dallas Jones, Paul and Tina Kennedy, and Tim Richards. Oh. And the winners are Dallas Jones, don't be wrong, Tim Richards, Paul and Tina Kennedy, and Jamie Hillard. And to accept on behalf of Dallas Jones is Dallas Jones.
It's exhausting. You are.
Thank you.
A bit verbose there.
Can I do the next lead on like Sale of the Century?
The 1985 Best Australian Doctor Who Artist Cartoons.
Right. Now, you'd like to know who they might have been. Nominations were Donna Angus, Bill Flowers. I know that man. Yes, I know Bill Flowers is. Michael Guy, Robin Hollier, David Kenyon, Steve MacArthur, Steve Panozzo, and Craig Wellington. And the results are Steve MacArthur, Steve Panozzo, Bill Flowers, Craig Wellington, Robin Hollier, Michael Guy, Donna Angus, and David Kenyon.
And accepting on behalf of Steve MacArthur, that's Tim Richards.
You're not nervous, are you?
Oh, no. Thank you. Well, on behalf of Steve, thanks very much. I don't know if you've seen a lot of Stephen's work. It's been in various things like Time Limit and so on. If you've seen the Mentalis Annual, it'll be about the latest example of his work. I think every time he draws something, he gets better and better. And I really think we haven't seen his full potential yet. So just keep watching for art. And by the way, if you want to see his art regularly, subscribe to Mentalis.
The 1985 Best Australian Doctor Who Fan Model Maker, no award this year.
Where do people take photographs of models?
That concludes the double gammons, but we have one more presentation. Today, during Katy's little escapade away to visit the scenic sites of Launceston during the lunch break, Karen Perks from the ACT was kind enough to run an impromptu best, worst Doctor Who joke. And we had many, many entries. They were all terrible. And so we're going to get the winner, Craig Wellington, up here to tell Katy his joke.
I have to say, my children only know one Doctor Who joke, and I'm so sick of it. Oh no, you know the terrible one, knock knock.
Knock knock.
Who's there? That's the Irish version.
And the competition prize was a lovely badge, Katy, and the back of John Pertwee's head.
Actually, I'm going to have a large safety pin put across my back, and that's your prize.
And a certificate presented to Craig for the worst joke told in an Australian Doctor Who convention.
Great. Getting into comedy myself, may I say you deserve it.
And finally, we've been running a raffle on our Huckster table, Doctor Who Fan Club Huckster table. The raffle was, if I can reach behind myself and get it. We were raffling, we had 5 Doctor Who hardbacks, The Awakening, Mythmakers, Invasion, Mind of Evil, which Katy might even sign, and Marco Polo. First prize is the first 2 of your choice, plus 1 left over from second prize. Second prize is to pick the other 2. So in other words, it's 3 for first prize and 2 for second. And what we might do is ask Katy to reach into the box and pull out 2 winners.
One winner, and that is William Duffy.
Duffy.
Well done. It's remarkable, right? I'll sign.
Mark, yeah.
And there's your receipt.
And now, second prize.
Michael Duffy.
No. And it's certainly not Dallas Jones. And it's B. Trump.
Too much to try.
You can pay me later. It's your receipt.
Smile this way.
Right.
Oh, it's real.
This way. And one last thing. This is probably the last time we have
one last thing before she goes, we'd just like to express our appreciation for coming along, providing such great entertainment for everyone. And so, what we've done, on behalf of the Friend Council of Time Lords and the Doctor Who Fan Club of Tasmania, we'd like to present you with this Tasmanian Devil.
Looks a bit like me, actually, but I'm not thrilled. I have to tell you, first of all, I have the most wonderful collection of stuffed animals. Me and Elvis Presley. But no, I love to collect these, and I do not have a Tasmanian devil. So this is terrific. And can I also just tell you how much fun that I find these things, and how much I appreciate you all, because I get very nervous. People never believe that, do they? They think you just slip in, zap, zap, do it. I get very nervous, and you all make it fun. And I go home after these occasions, and I feel terrific. And I thank you all for sort of being so nice when I come to these things, and I hope you'll continue to invite me, even though that it's a long time I've been in Doctor Who, because I really do enjoy it. Thank you.
One more announcement, and I've been asked on behalf of the Galactic Tours Convention to announce that Katy Manning will now be guesting at the Galactic Tours Convention in March next year.
In Melbourne.
I didn't know that. Anne, you really must keep me more informed, you know.
So what we're going to do now is very quickly, in the last quarter of an hour or so that Katy has, we're going to set up another table up here on the stage, and you can have your photo taken with Katy. Instant photos are too.
And him.
And anyone who wants anything signed at the last moment can have that done too. So we'll just set up the table and be right underway.